I've been asked for a fair while now to cover the new version of Mr.FondusBroMan's Scarf the Wolf, mostly by the guy himself, but it's still a relatively popular mod, so I'm sure some other people wanted to see it too. Sorry if I sound a little weird, I've just had a pretty nasty cold. But without further ado, let's dive in. Scarf falls into a trap that a lot of modded characters do, in not really having a niche. He has 6 abilities, but many of them have effects that either cancel each other out, or are generally pretty segregated from one another. 3 of the abilities are traversal related, while another 3 are more for use in combat. Pressing jump once in the air will cause you to perform a float dash, adding as a slightly modified thock. Essentially, you get the standard burst of momentum forward that you get from any other thock derivative, although the outcome is a little more pronounced here than with many others, because you launch further at higher speeds and because you aren't affected by gravity while in this state, making this useful for crossing large gaps. Be aware though, that this isn't particularly good for jump corrections and such, as you get launched far too quickly with too little control to make small exact movements. This combos into a second reversal ability, the gravity jump, which is performed by pressing jump again after the float dash. This is a double jump. Quite powerful, but other than that, no extra changes. The problem is, these are 2 abilities that will be used in very different contexts, yet there is absolutely no way to decide which ability you want to use first. If you want to perform a float dash, great, you can do that. But what if you want to correct a small mistake during platforming, one of the main reasons for double jumps existing in any platformer? Well, you're screwed, because you have no choice but to perform a massive boost forward first, which will inevitably cause you to screw up your jump. The legacy version of Scarf used a system where you can use custom 1 to select which ability to use, which seems like such a random thing to remove and replace with a system that reduces player expression and makes it very difficult to actually use the gravity jump for many of the purposes it's intended for. There are 2 other minor problems too. Scarf has custom sealed abilities, but from my testing, it seems most of these are just performing the sealed standard gimmick after your gravity jump, so not the most interesting. More pressingly, there's this odd delay after performing a float dash before you can perform your gravity jump, which feels quite clunky. It stops these 2 abilities, which can be used together quite effectively, from feeling particularly natural to perform together. This is odd, considering you have to use the abilities together, so this delay could really do with just being removed. Scarf's final traversal ability is a Nitro Boost, which is a standard dash mode mechanic. Run for long enough, suddenly jump up massively in speed, great for speed runs. Except this is one of those cases where a dash mode has been thrown into a character's moveset without making sure they can reasonably accommodate it. All of Scarf's abilities, with the occasional exception of the float dash, will usually cause you to drop out of this state, which is especially jarring with the gravity jump, as it drops your momentum too much to continue the state after landing. So you can't use the rest of your moveset if you want to stay at these speeds, usually meaning you'll have to drop out of it relatively quickly. It also feels like it takes a long time to end in comparison with other dash mode incarnations, although that might just be because, again, you have to be very passive with the game in order to use it, and therefore aren't particularly engaged with finding interesting routes through levels. Finally, Scarf has 3 different combat-oriented abilities. I'll breeze through the first 2 relatively quickly, as they're pretty standard versions of the moves. Pressing spin releases a short-range sickle slash, defeating any enemy standing in front of you. This can be used in the air, and can also break walls, spikes and floors, because Scarf can't enter a smaller state like a spin and therefore has to often take Amy's route through levels. Holding spin will cause you to charge up a plasma attack, and this is what allows you to attack enemies from further away. Releasing spin after this aura appears will cause you to perform the standard sickle slash, as well as release a large, freely aimed projectile that can travel a fairly hefty distance and bounces off floors and walls. Finally, we have Scarf's most unique ability, his dodges. Holding a direction and then pressing custom 2 will cause you to launch yourself in that direction, with no control over your trajectory, so make sure there's nothing hazardous around you. It seems like an interesting ability, but I found it to be generally pretty unreliable on controller, oftentimes failing to actually engage upon inputting the command and only playing its sound effect. It is also completely irrelevant in a standard level, as again, you have no control about where you can stop, it only very slightly lifts you off the ground, and is always overshadowed by just performing a float dash. Overall, Scarf's moveset suffers from a lack of an identity. It's split into two parts, with both vying to be the more relevant one, but there aren't enough unique ideas for either to actually stand out. I'd say that the combat sight is a little more fleshed out in concept, but in execution, both are pretty derivative and lacking. To improve this, I have a few recommendations. Remove the delay between the float dash and gravity jump, bring back the original system where custom 1 can be used to swap between abilities, and allow the gravity jump to better maintain momentum. Dodging doesn't seem like something that can really be fixed for me, as it seems to be mainly a controller issue, which can be notoriously hard to solve in SRB2. These changes would by no means solve every problem with the moveset, but it would make it feel more natural. Scarf's sprites have improved slightly since I last covered him, mainly by making him a little lankier, which reduces how much he looks like an edgy 8-year-old who thought he was cooler than he was. There are still some fairly poor sprites though, most noticeably his sickle slash seemingly creating some weird white mohawk on his back. The main area of improvement has been in the use of effects though. Scarf's old effects were pretty bad, being inconsistent and really lacking oomph. Now though, with some help from the overhauled and significantly improved sound design, attacks feel much more powerful. Enemies are launched away from you when hit by your sickle slash, which is much more unique of an idea than the energy sword he used to have, leaving behind nothing more than a pile of gears and a cloud of smoke. The plasma attack is no longer this non-threatening volleyball that awkwardly shoots out the end of a red baton, it's a swirling ball of energy that emanates power as it flies through the air, although I think the aura that surrounds you could still do some work. Float dash, gravity jump and nitro boost now share a standardized orange effect, rather than the completely different, entirely unrelated effects they used to have, and nitro boost also feels quite powerful with the whole hugely OTT use of motion lines around the edge of the screen. Overall, Scarf's new update feels a little odd for me. I mentioned in the previous video on him that swapping between abilities using Custom 1 felt clunky, but now it outright feels poorly planned out, as these two abilities, which should be used in entirely different contexts, are now awkwardly mashed together without much thought. Combat has also seen comparatively few changes when put next to traversal, which makes the update seem unbalanced. I would say that huge improvements have been made surrounding the moveset though. While the actual character sprites are fairly similar, huge changes have been made in the effects and sound design category that really elevate the aesthetical sides of the character. Despite these improvements though, I still think Scarf can only be given a 6 out of 10 until his moveset is rejigged. I hope you enjoyed the video, and ciao.